where they strung up a man, whom they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James, and Merry Christmas to all y'all out there that are celebrating the big event. Hope you got your Christmas shopping done. You know, it's getting kind of close. Not to brag, but I had my shopping done by the end of November. All of it. Coffee. Coffee, coffee, coffee. What more can I say about the best thing ever? If you want to get the best of the best thing ever, swing by 4501 McPherson, the Organic Man Coffee Trike. Julio roasts the coffee right there in the back room, which is actually to the left. If you're a coffee connoisseur, whole bean coffee is the way to go. You grind it fresh each morning, that way it tastes better, it lasts longer. If you're not in Laredo, you can go to organicmancoffeetrike.shop and get the best of the best of the best. Last week, I called Vic Hermanson's show Trailer Park Terrors, which is just wrong. How his show is called Trailer Trash Terrors. And now I know the two are kind of synonymous. You kind of find most trailer trash living in trailer parks. I've seen some really nice trailer parks, and I've met some really nice people living in them. I've also met some rather out there folks living in conditions that you usually only see on TV commercials when some celebrity is begging for money. So if you want to listen to Vic Hermanson's show, it's called Trailer Trash Terrors. And it's well worth listening to. That's where I encountered Annabelle Lee and Beelzebubba. It's a good show. Hopefully, someday I'll stop making mistakes. Well, actually, no, because that'll be the day I stop breathing. Unlike some people I know, I'm not perfect yet. I had L.A. Marzulli on the show back in March 29th of 2018. It was my 100th show and I missed it because of bad math. I thought it was number 98, but I went back and counted and it was number 100. I was listening to the confessionals with Tony Merkel, and he was talking to none other than L.A. Marzulli. At the beginning of the show, I thought to myself, I need to get L.A. back on the show again and see what's new with him. Then, towards the end of the show, I was thinking, well, I can't really add much to that show. Tony kind of covered all the points. So if I were to have LA on the show, it would just be a repeat of what somebody else has already done. That's why I don't do a lot of interviews anymore. A lot of people are just saying the same thing on each show, and well, it's a lot easier just to go back and listen to other people's shows. Great, now I've got two cats between me and the computer that I'm recording with. So, if you like L.A. Marzulli, you like listening to what he has to say about giants and fallen angels and all kinds of things like that, catch him on the Confessionals podcast called Fallen Angel Operation. It'll give you something to think about in the middle of the night when you're trying to go to sleep. Has this ever happened to you? You're laying there in bed when all of a sudden something wakes you up. Was it a sound? Did something touch your hand or your foot? Has this been an ongoing thing for you, or is this just once in a great while, or maybe just one time? Now you're wide awake. You know there's something in the room, some unseen thing, that you can't see, even though it's not really that dark. Your heart is pounding in your ears. You know it's there, but where? And what is it? Oddly, once the sensation of total fear passes, a lot of people will simply just fall back to sleep, as if their visiting monster or demon wasn't a thing. I hear this a lot from people who have had bizarre encounters. Josh Turner wrote about a few cases in his books. As soon as the threat is gone, they just go back to sleep. This sounds more and more as if the event caused so much strain on the psyche. Once the room is, well, relatively safe again, the mind crashes. Either that or these creatures can somehow cause our minds to shut down once they've done whatever it was that they'd set out to do. Come feed on your fears? With the light of day and the fog of time, the incident is written off as being just a dream, if not forgotten completely. Few people are willing to admit they were so scared the night before they thought they were going to die. The boys in the white lab coats say this is simply night terrors. Kind of like a bad dream, only you don't wake up from the dream, you continue having it thinking you wake up. The folks we look to for answers will say the person only thought they had woke up. It was all a part of the same dream. To listen to those white coated people, you get the idea that we're all a bunch of uneducated riffraff. We see things or we hear things that aren't there, and our imaginations run wild, and we don't really know what we're seeing or doing. Just these poor uneducated folks out here that are seeing monsters. You never see a bunch of scientists trying to capture a night encounter with the same unknown entities. They're too busy studying the effects of LSD on elephants. Yes, if you don't think that actually happened, just look up Tusco and see what happened to a bunch of our tax dollars. I've seen a few self made videos of people sleeping who had thought something might be visiting them late at night, so they rig up a camera to film themselves while they're sleeping. On occasion, they've caught some wild things going on, but never the entity itself. In one video, a man is asleep in his bed when something grabs his legs and pulls them up off the bed. As far as I can tell, this wasn't CGI or some kind of a hoax. In another video, a young woman has her covers pulled from her while she's asleep. Once again, no signs of any manipulation of the video that I could see. Of course, then again, there are hundreds of videos out there where you see the wires, or you notice that the video was shut off for a second while things were changed in the room. These hoaxers, I don't know, I think they should all be lined up and slapped upside the head with a dead fish or something. In 1975, the Vietnam War ended. I was a 1A draft choice. My older brother had a neurological disorder that caused his neck to lock up, which caused it impossible to turn his head. That gave him a 4F classification, so I got the preferential 1A. All through high school, I was told by many liberal teachers that I was going to get shipped off to Vietnam and get killed in that unjust war. It's amazing how many school teachers in our town were there because they were trying to get out of the draft. We only had one guy that actually served in the military. I don't know why, but I remember his name, Mr. Richter. That's weird because I can't remember any of my other school teachers. Well, he was in the military. Ah, anyway, that's a great way to teach kids. You're all gonna die, basically. I was not an A student. not even a really good B. High C's, few low B's. Everything except art class. For some odd reason, I was getting all A's in art. I had difficulty paying attention. They didn't have a fancy name for it yet, so I was just a bad student. College was not in my future. I did have one choice, though: the Marine Corps or the Army. When I was 17 years old, the Vietnam War came crashing to a conclusion, and President Ford ended selective service. This was probably done because his son had failed to register for the draft. Gee, politicians. Who would have guessed it? Selective service registration was then reopened in 1980 under President Carter. This not having to register led to a huge mess in my government employment. To work for the government, you must have registered for selective service, the draft. I didn't register because for that short period of time, it wasn't required. Every 5 years, when my background was being done, a background investigation, I would be asked about my failure to register for the draft. Every time I had to explain about this presidential proclamation, every time they would have to call the investigation to a pause while they went and looked this up, every 5 years I had to go through this. Never mind that I had my honorable discharge from the Army, and never mind that I had actually gone in and served. No, that didn't matter. The paperwork wasn't completed the way they wanted it. Well, it was a mess. Every single 5 years. The exit from Vietnam was not very good. It was a mess, just like in 2021. Somebody yelled, "Fend for yourselves," and the military jumped on airplanes and helicopters and they left because that's what they were told to do by the commander in chief. And all the civilians that got left behind, a lot of them didn't make it to the end of the year. Now, there was a lot of bad things done because there's no longer our soldiers there with guns to keep the really bad people from doing really bad things. A bunch of folks known as the Hmong lived in the mountains in the Tonkin region of Vietnam. After World War II, the Christian Hmong had gotten along great with the French, who were now running the country. But this put them at odds with the Hmong who had sided with the Chinese, the atheist of their group. When France was ejected from Vietnam and the US stepped in it, or into it, the war that is, the Christian Hmong were recruited by the CIA to help fight the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese military. To understand this whole situation over there would take hours, and a lot of my listeners would go looking for somebody else to listen to. As the U.S. was leaving Vietnam, a lot of refugees were being relocated to surrounding countries. Most were simply abandoned because that was how those folks, the ones yelling and screaming with the protest signs, wanted it done. You would almost think that the communists were guiding them somehow. Well, a lot of the Hmong were moved to Laos. Well, then Laos fell to the communists, and these refugees had to be relocated once more, this time to the U.S. A lot of them wound up out in California, but then all 50 states got a few. Uh, why put them all together in one spot? Let's just scatter them throughout the country where hopefully they'll be able to get along with the rest of the country. Picture how you would feel being pulled from your home and relocated to a different country, only to be relocated again and again. You would naturally gravitate towards other people from your home country. The Hmong did this. They created whole communities of folks from their original areas. 1981, a story. ran about a young man from Laos who had relocated to the United States only to die in his sleep from unknown causes. It turned out he was not the first. He was actually the fourth man to die under these bizarre circumstances. More and more men died over the next few weeks. They were all healthy. There was no physiological cause for their death. There were others sleeping close by who were not affected in the least. Headlines came out saying things like mysterious fatal malady striking Hmong men or night deaths of Asian men unexplained. The CDC went in and did a search but found no reason for any of these deaths. It would seem that 13 men all died from fright in their sleep. A few white coated folks came out with theories on why these healthy young men died. It was stress related. Well, these guys all lived through a war and being relocated without any physical problems. The place they were living now was just about stress free. My theory is somewhat bizarre, but it's the only one I have that makes any sense. 1984 movie Dreamscape came out, and it was about a young man who was played by Dennis Quaid, who was able to enter other people's dreams. He encounters another person played by David Patrick Kelly, who is a dream assassin. He is sent into people's dreams to murder them. If you don't know who David Patrick Kelly was or is, if you saw the movie The Warriors, his most famous line was, "Warriors come out to play." No, I'm not going to do it the way he did it. That was about the most annoying thing in the whole movie, but he did a good job of it. Maybe these Hmong men were singled out because they knew something that the shadow government didn't want disclosed. They had all been working for the CIA during the Vietnam War. Maybe something happened back then that the current administration didn't want to ever come to light. This would imply that the shadow government was able to enter people's dreams. Think about the Montauk Project. What all were those people doing as they manipulated young kids' brains? There could also be the possibility that the shadow government targeted these men because they had worked together and there was some kind of a connection. It was far easier to talk to and get them to agree if you already had a history. To get any project off the ground, experiments had to be performed, and sometimes people died. It's all for the good of the country. Well, actually, those people. In past shows, I've talked about how the government might be in the habit of producing movies and TV shows that dealt with various secret projects so that the run of the mill folks would think any stories coming out on bizarre things was just a movie or a TV show. A lot of people think that the Montauk Project is based on the TV show Stranger Things. Hey, I had the name first. When in fact it's the other way around. The TV show is based on the book, which is based on what actually happened. It would seem that the average person is easy to manipulate. Maybe it's too much fluoride in their diet or something. Or maybe the way our minds are being attacked on a daily basis is setting us up for control. After these deaths had been in the papers, Wes Craven created the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street, which also just happened to come out in 1984. Freddy Krueger was entering kids' dreams to kill them. Some community members attributed the deaths to chemical agents. The soldiers in the Vietnam War were exposed to things like Agent Orange, which was widely used to destroy vegetation, and also it wound up killing a lot of people. That theory was not supported by the doctors or the boys in the white lab coats. Investigators could find no medical explanation for the deaths. It wasn't caused by heart attack, poisoning, or chemicals. Other Hmong believed that they were being punished by the spirits of their ancestors for leaving their homeland. Their inability to do right by their ancestors because they were no longer there, or because they didn't have the right materials that they needed to do the rituals that they had to perform in order to keep their passed on relatives happy. The fatal alignment, later classified as sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome, the SUNS, has been investigated by the Center for Disease Control at length. The wave of SUNS deaths among Southeast Asians is still unexplained even today. The 2013 Washington Navy Yard shooter, Aaron Alexis, had been receiving mental health treatment and had anger management issues. And he told the Rhode Island police that he had been hearing voices and he was being harassed through microwave mind control. Conspiracy theorists, better known as truth seekers, say that Alexis was targeted, an individual or a TI. This term is used by people who believe they're being stalked by the shadow government. Alexis police report stated covert microwave weapons were used to send messages to his mind while he slept. Do you know the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth? About 2 years. I wonder, having official police reports stating that he was being stalked by the shadow government, he was hearing voices inside his head, he was being targeted, shouldn't all of this have flagged him to lose his security clearance for a while? Maybe to prevent him from entering the shipyard? And yet, nothing was done about it. Alexis was seeing a psychologist about his bizarre thoughts, and yet nobody saw fit to maybe have this guy watched a little closer, just for a little while. Maybe keep him away from the people in the shipyard. Maybe search him next time you see him walking into the building carrying a big parcel or a bunch of weapons. A lot of folks say that this microwave weapon theory is simply absurd. Oh, there's no such thing, they'll say. Mind control is only something from the movies, like the Montauk Project. But the Pentagon has been researching the possibility of using voice projection technology in the past as a less lethal weapon. Could the CIA have been targeting the Hmong to test a new weapon, which was later used to drive Alex to murder 12 people? Why kill one person when you can kill a dozen? If someone can think it up, some government contractor somewhere is trying to make it. This next story is my own. I've told it a few times, but it is relevant to this show, so here it is again. Working in Laredo as a Border Patrol agent, I have spent some time by myself. It used to be that we were always short-handed, so on many occasions I would be working alone. Somebody came up with this weird idea of parking broke down vehicles along the river to make it look like we had more manpower. We called these scarecrow units. Usually the vehicle would be parked close enough to a manned unit so they could keep an eye on it so that people didn't steal parts from under the hood. Now, there was a broke down Suburban parked just downriver from the railroad bridge going from Mexico to the U.S. I was driving about doing my job late one evening, about 3 miles downriver. There was an old abandoned building where they used to make rope. Huge old brick structure. It looked like it was about 2 or 3 stories tall. We called this place Lottie Lee's. The machinery was still in there. The yard had been filled with old industrial washing machines. These things were as big as a car, and it made for a lot of places for people to hide. It was only a few blocks to the river, and illegal aliens would use this yard as a layup spot. The gates were all broken down, and the doors, well, they didn't close anymore. I parked on the street and I went in to see if anybody was hiding inside. This was a common thing because of the proximity to the river. The idea was you didn't walk around with your flashlight because they would see you coming long before you found them. They would simply get up and slip out through one of the many holes in the fence. So you would walk around in the pitch dark, kind of trying to sneak up on anyone. You also had to be careful you didn't step on things that would make noise. I kind of scanned the entire yard and I didn't see anybody, so now it was time to go inside and look. After clearing the yard, I went in and I started to poke around. The machinery that had been used to make rope was still there. It was almost like one day they decided, oh, it's time to go home, and they just never came back. Everything was lined up as if waiting for somebody to come along and flip a switch and start making rope again. There were spools of nylon hanging from above, ready to feed the machines. All they needed was some electricity and somebody at the controls. This building had a basement. I took the steps down and began checking around. There was only the one set of stairs going down. There was no back exit, so now I turned my flashlight on. Something felt wrong. I've been down in that basement dozens of times. I could almost walk around it without the light. It was never a scary place until that night. It felt like I was in a horror movie, and the only thing missing was the scary music and the monster that was going to jump out of the dark and do bad things to me. I was armed. I had a huge mag flashlight. I was in really good physical shape. I used to run marathons. I used to work out at the gym all the time. It was all I could do not to turn and run back up the stairs to my vehicle and drive away. I scanned the darkness looking for threats. My light passed over a human shape on the far side of the room. Boy, that was a few seconds of terror. This was a shock that caused my heart to practically jump out of my throat until I realized it was just a mannequin. With my heart pounding in my ears, I walked over to look at it, and I wondered who put a mannequin in the basement of a rope factory. It had never been there before. Like I said, I'd been down that basement dozens of times. All the times I'd been in that building, I had never seen anything like that. There was no reason for it to be there, but there it was. Well, that feeling of absolute terror was still there. And now I had company in the form of a mannequin. I have always had a bizarre sense of humor. I've been known to do things I probably should not have done in the name of a joke. Never ever pass on the opportunity to play a prank on someone. I wanted that mannequin. I managed to walk over and grab it without scaring myself to death, and then I got back up the stairs without breaking my neck or an ankle. I laid it in the back of my Bronco and I drove over to the railroad bridge, and then I sat there and I waited in the dark until a train started pulling north out of Mexico. As the train was going north, all the agents on the bridge were busy checking for illegal riders. I pulled up next to the empty Suburban and I placed the mannequin on the passenger seat so it would be visible from the bridge. Then I drove back to my assigned area. About 5 minutes went by when I heard the guys at the railroad bridge yelling on the radio that somebody was trying to steal the Scarecrow unit parked by the bridge. I don't know how he knew, but my supervisor came by about a half hour later and he pulled up next to me and he said he thought it was hilarious. I noticed the mannequin was sitting in the back of his unit. The thing wound up out in the horse barn for the next couple of weeks and then it vanished. A few weeks later, I drove back to the old rope factory and I walked down into the basement again to see if it felt creepy or scary. Nothing. It was just a basement. It felt like it always felt. Nothing odd or mysterious. Just an old, dark room filled with bits and pieces of rope making machinery, minus one mannequin. What did I feel that one time? Why was it so scary that one night that it never happened again? Never before, never after. Was there something down there from another dimension that had stepped through a portal, maybe, and it was there feeding off of my terror? Last time I was in that neighborhood, I drove by where the old building used to be. They've torn it down, and I think they built apartments on top of it. I wonder if any of the people living in the apartments have ever experienced anything in the past. Back in 2016, a bunch of U.S. diplomats working in Cuba began to fall ill. The symptoms ranged from pain and ringing in the ears to cognitive dysfunction. That's an inability to think. U.S. and Canadian embassy staff in Havana, Cuba were reporting all kinds of strange afflictions that the medical staff couldn't explain. I don't know why I keep coughing. Soon their families began to report these same problems. Military personnel assigned to the embassy also began to show signs and symptoms of this unknown illness. In 2017, more people, including U.S. intelligence and military personnel and their families, reported having these symptoms in other places, such as China, India, Europe, Washington, D.C. The U.S. Department of State and the Department of Defense and other federal entities have called these events the anomalous health incident, better known as the Havana syndrome. Of over 1,000 reported cases, the majority of U.S. investigative bodies found only a few dozen cases that were suspicious. Not that the other cases could be explained, they just didn't want anybody to think something strange was going on. These cases are suspicious and these are unknown. The knee jerk reaction was to say that these people were all suffering from fatigue, food poisoning, a natural gas leak, insect bites, anything other than an invisible attacker. There were TV shows coming on that explained things that all solved the issue by saying it was pesticides, bugs singing, changes in diet, just anything except an invisible attacker. When somebody finally thought maybe they should look into this, the U.S. began realizing that the cause was probably a microwave weapon that bathed the targets in radiation. The U.S. military is now looking for a sensor that will alert soldiers when they're being attacked with microwave weapons. The soldiers may not even realize that they're under attack by a beam that is invisible to the eye, but painful to the brain, and possibly deadly as well. Soon I'll bet we'll be seeing microwave sensors for our homes. This will be accompanied by commercials with lawyers saying, "Were you bombarded with microwave radiation and now you're growing a tail? Call such and such a number, and we'll get filthy rich while you slowly die." Oh well. Just a note here. A lot of experts on TV will call these less than lethal or non lethal weapons. They talk about these non lethal weapons like they actually know what they're saying. There's no such thing as a non lethal weapon. They are less lethal. That is the absolute correct term. They're not less than lethal, they're simply less lethal. Unlike a bullet, the chances are less likely that you're going to die from being targeted, but there is still a chance that you will die. I always get a kick out of these experts on TV talking about non lethal weapons like they know what they're talking about. It gives them zero credibility. Like people that talk about a magazine clip, a magazine clip that holds like 1,000 rounds. Uh, One goes in an M1 Garand and the other goes in other kinds of rifles. Do not mistake a clip for a magazine. There is no such thing as a magazine clip. It's kind of like when somebody is talking on the radio and they say, over and out. You're over or you're out, but you're not over and out. When you say over, you are turning the radio over to the person that you're talking to. When you're out, that means you're done. Goodbye. You don't say goodbye on the radio, you say out. The Defense Health Agency is now looking for a wearable sensor that will detect radio frequency weapons, which project intense beams of electromagnetic energy, including microwave. RF weapons are already being developed by several nations. The U.S. is developing microwave weapons to shoot down drones or as a less lethal form of crowd control. There are also reports that China might have used microwave weapons against the Indian troops in 2020. Back in the late 60s and the early 70s, Doris Blither had discovered the thrills and spills involved in using a Ouija board. Like a lot of folks, she started out thinking the board was mostly just a toy that just maybe possibly would answer one or two questions. As answers were given and they proved to be true, Doris began to use the talking board more and more. Soon she was turning to the spirit world for just about every question in her life. I hear cases like this all the time. It's just a toy. Followed by, oh, this is kind of neat. The folks involved are slowly being pulled into using the board anytime they can. They're opening themselves up more and more to whatever spirit is on the other side of that board. It becomes like a drug. It's a real thrill to have answers to questions, especially on things coming up in the future. Not everybody using a Ouija board is going to find themselves in deep trouble. In fact, few people fall into the trap. But the trap is always there, waiting for the right person to come along and become ensnared. Are you that right person? How do you know if you are or not until one day you wake up and your bed is 3 feet up off the floor and you're spewing out split pea soup all over some priest? Doris Blither wound up having a few kids, as in four, without ever having a husband. Life was not how she had hoped it would turn out. With limited finances, she was forced to move into a rundown shack. It was a roof overhead and little else. The house was at 11547 Braddock Drive in Culver City. The house had started out as a farmhouse. The land was sold and other houses were built around. Soon the farmhouse was a part of a neighborhood, a not too well kept neighborhood. When all your money is going for food and clothing, there's just not much left for home improvements. It's not that the people living there were nasty or uncivilized, they just didn't have the finances to fix the places up. Soon after moving in, Doris was visited by one of her neighbors. An elderly Hispanic woman came by and warned Doris this was not a good place to live. The older woman said that she had lived in that same house years ago when it was still a farm, and she was a little girl. She said that she had seen ghosts and she heard unexplained voices. She soon became convinced that the place wasn't just haunted, it was possessed. It wasn't the souls of the dead she was seeing, but some kind of demons or elementals, spirits that had never walked the earth as humans. The woman told Doris that she should take her kids and leave, find some other place to live. That particular house was dangerous. Another neighbor, Javier Ortega, wrote about the visits. He knew the older woman and he knew the history of the house. He also documented some of the things going on in the area. This might sound a bit odd to some folks. I do the same thing. Anytime something weird or unusual happens, I make a note of it on my computer. If things get weirder, I have a reference so I can go back and not have to rely on my memory, which is not all that great. For example, last night, somebody to our south was popping off fireworks, big fireworks. It almost sounded like somebody was trying to blow something up. Now, there would be a splay of bangs and explosions, but there were no sirens, so I figure it wasn't a battle going on, or it was just something weird, but I've made a note of it for future reference, just in case. According to her son, Brian Harris, Doris was also using drugs and drinking. The combination was dangerous. Having her brain in a less than sober state and allowing a doorway to who knows where to be opened, she was making herself a perfect target for unseen forces. Doris was inviting others to come to her home and play around with the spirit boards. She would hold seances, wild parties, and opening doorways that were seldom closed. You know, when you're finished using a Ouija board, you have to close the session. Well, when you're drunk or passed out on drugs, you don't do that. Drinking, to some, is just a fun time. To others, it's a puppet show. First, the man takes a drink. Then, the drink takes a drink. Then, the drink takes the man. There are people out there who cannot handle alcohol. And there are other idiots out there that will insist, come on, it's just one beer. It won't kill you. Well, actually, it probably will. Adding drugs to the mix, and you've got a mess. Trying to raise kids at the same time while drinking and using drugs, as well as playing around with the spirit world, things are bound to go south. Some people are just lousy parents. There is something called fetal alcohol syndrome. Any pregnant woman is advised to avoid alcohol consumption because she will be drinking for two. The growing fetus inside her will be bombarded with alcohol, which will damage the brain and possibly parts of the body. Life is hard with kids. It's even worse with kids suffering from FAS. Last week, I mentioned John's mother saying that shadow beings were evil creatures waiting for people to become less than sober so they could move in and use the victim to do their bidding. All that fun Doris was having led to some bizarre circumstances. Late one night, something appeared in her bedroom. Well, it didn't appear, it just was there. The sound of something moving around in the dark. She knew something was there, but she managed to convince herself it was just a little too much drinking and maybe the side effects of the drugs. Doris would wake up in the morning feeling sore all over, as if somebody had beat her with a baseball bat or something. She said it was like she'd been attacked by someone that she could not see. Her entire body was bruised and sore. Her children had heard a commotion coming from her bedroom, but, well, they were kind of used to that sort of thing late at night because their mother partied a lot, a lot, a lot. Drinking and doing drugs, at first Doris was battling her inner demons. After using the Ouija board, it seemed that she was now battling just plain demons as well. When dealing with drunks, which I have, it is difficult to figure out what the actual problem is with them. You can ask them for their symptoms, but a lot of what they're saying could just be in their mind. I don't know how many times I had people telling me that they had bugs biting them in various locations where there were no bugs. Uh, a lot of people have had that. Some drinkers who have gone in need of a drink experience an itching sensation all over their body. They will swear that there are bugs crawling around biting them. I'll bet Vic knows all about this from working at the emergency department in Houston. How many drunks have we seen in our lives? Delirium tremens. That's what it's actually called. We would call it whiskey spiders. Long term heavy alcohol use sets up a tug of war effect inside your body. Alcohol is on one side slowing down the central nervous system. Your central nervous system controls kind of important things like your heart beating and your respiration, just little things like that. What the alcohol is doing is it's slowing everything down. It's making your heart beat slower. It's making you breathe less often, which sounds like a good thing until you realize that you're starting to turn blue from a lack of oxygen. So the central nervous, which is there to keep us alive, it tweaks itself up. It turns up the signal, causing the heart to beat at a normal pace, causing the lungs to work at a normal respiration. It's normal for that person. It's not normal for anyone else. They have become so adjusted to drinking alcohol and having a slow heart rate and respirations that now the central nervous system is working overtime trying to bring it up to a normal rate. Over time, this becomes how your central nervous system functions. If you suddenly stop drinking, it's like the alcohol side lets go of the rope in the tug of war. Suddenly, your central nervous system doesn't have to pull back against the alcohol to keep the activity at a proper level. Your central nervous system cannot just suddenly slow itself down. So now the patient is going to experience a rapid heart rate and breathing very fast, which can lead to hyperventilation. Just all kinds of fun things when you abuse your bodies. This causes DTs. People with DTs may have hallucinations, seeing, feeling, or hearing things that aren't really there. They will hear voices. They will see things like shadow people or things moving around the room by themselves. They'll smell things. They'll feel things touching them. This leads to any kind of a complaint with either the police or the doctors to be very difficult to understand because she says she sees things, hears things, and feels things, but then she's drinking and doing drugs. Maybe this is just her mind. However, her children also had been seeing and hearing things. This whole situation may have gone unseen had not they also been involved. Doris wasn't the only one being attacked either. Her kids were being hit, punched, pulled from their beds at night. They would develop bite marks on their arms and legs. The four kids were suffering attacks as well, unable to see what was doing the attacking. Kids have a weird ability to adjust and accept things quickly. They have nothing to weigh the situation against. Being chomped on by invisible thing was just something they had to live with. They didn't know that wasn't right. The attacks just kept getting worse. Soon, the unseen attacker would throw their mother across the room as they sat there watching, unable to help. Violent attacks would take place at all times of the day and night. Doris seemed to be the main target, but the whole family was suffering along with her. Over the next few months, the invisible beings began to form into shadow men, shape things. They looked like huge, vicious monsters in a semi human form. They could be seen through these entities. But even without a physical body, they could connect with the family and do damage. The apparitions were described as appearing humanoid but foggy. While their shapes could be seen, their facial features were never clear. Sometimes even the most drugged out people will wake up one day and think, I gotta do something with myself. They become sick and tired of being sick and tired. Doris Bither contacted parapsychologist Barry Taff in 1974 to relate this unbelievable phenomenon that her and her family were experiencing. Taff was working in a now defunct parapsychology lab run by Thelma Moss at the University of California in Los Angeles. At one time, scientists actually looked into the unknown. Now they like to play it safe and study things that others have declared safe to look into. The saying goes that every PhD knows where the library is. If you can find it in a library, it's already been studied. With the assistance of Kerry Gaynor, Taft conducted a preliminary interview of Bither's paranormal claims. During the interview, it was revealed that Bither had a history of physical and substance abuse along with a traumatic childhood. Investigators also found that Bither and her 4 children were living in a condemned house that was in very bad condition. I've seen this on several occasions. Desperate people will move into any kind of a falling down building and they will pay money to do so. The people making money off of others' desperation should be beat about the head with a dead trout or a live skunk. Bither said she was attacked and raped by one of several invisible entities. She also told about seeing translucent humanoid shapes in her home, hearing noises in the house not made by her kids, having things move around by unseen hands, all kinds of poltergeist activity. A poltergeist is simply a noisy ghost. Polter means to knock, and geist, that means ghost. This came back from a time when spiritualists would ask the ghosts to knock as their form of communication. The people at the parapsychology lab must have figured this woman is drinking too much. That's why she's seeing and hearing things. Any researcher would have directed Doris to a psychologist or psychiatrist, or at least a family counselor. Uh, Try to get her into rehab, perhaps. Any good researcher would ask the kids if they had seen or heard anything. The children told the same scary stories that Doris had passed on. They showed the scratches and the bite marks, swearing these were caused by unseen forces. Brian Harris told the investigators that his mother, Doris, had experienced a paranormal phenomenon prior to moving into this rundown house. The occurrences had been mostly just sounds and sometimes seeing shadows. Nothing physical until they had moved into the old shack. Wanting to help and get to the bottom of these stories, the researchers arranged to visit the house again. Dr. Barry Taft, Kerry Gaynor, and Dr. Thelma Moss went to see if there was anything to these attacks. Other folks got involved as well. They looked the place over and they wondered how anybody could live in such a conditions. During the course of their visits, investigators noted that Taft called poltergeist activity. Objects would fall from the shelves by themselves. There were strange lights seen in the corners. There was a bad odor that would come and go in the house, and there were cold spots as well. The researchers indicated that these occurrences decreased over the course of their visits. I've heard this before as well. There might be a lot of activity at a location. When investigators show up, it dies down to nothing or just a very minimum amount of activity. It would seem that the spirits are possibly checking out the new folks to see what might be coming, or to figure out how to attack them once their guard is down. You go into a investigation, you've kind of got your guard up. You're ready to say no, this is not real, or get behind me, Satan, or whatever you need to do. As you investigate a location, you become comfortable there, and eventually you start to let your guard down. Once you've let your guard down, now you're a target. The researchers were joined on occasion by some of Blither's acquaintances who could communicate with the spirits. Blither had held seances in her home, and there were quite a few people in her life that were connected to the spirit world. The parapsychology lab also had a lot of members that wanted to see what was going on. Sitting in the office hearing stories isn't quite as cool as actually going on an investigation. The whole team was allowed to visit the house on occasion. With a lot of people traipsing in and out of the house, things died down. Eventually, the lab people all decided, or they were told, they needed to stay away and just the initial group would continue looking into the place. The camera and the voice recorder are the mainstays of paranormal investigations. Today, we have all kinds of new and wonderful cameras and recorders. Back then, it was a regular 35 millimeter camera, a Polaroid instant camera, and a tape recorder. The camera used film that had to be advanced after each click of the shutter. The Polaroid did develop right there as you waited. It took a couple of minutes, and sometimes the film, that wasn't cheap, was affected by heat or cold. The film had to be processed in a dark room, and you didn't know if you caught anything for days and sometimes weeks after taking pictures. The prints had to be enlarged if anything odd was seen. The tape recorder used magnetic tape, which had its own set of problems. After a session, somebody would have to sit down and listen to all the tapes, trying to catch any weird sounds. And sometimes tape recorders made weird sounds as they were recording, as the magnetic tape, which was magnetic, would start to build up on the heads. So occasionally you had to clean the heads, but once the damage was done to the recording, well, it was already there. Oh, the fun of having a magnetic tape, like the 8-track tape player. Today, we can run recordings through a sound analyzer that will show spikes anytime there's a sound in the background that needs closer examination. You don't have to rely on your ears to catch EVPs. You just simply look for the wavy line of sound. During their investigations, Taff and Gaynor caught some lights, some orbs flying about the house. This could have been caused by bugs or dust, but what they caught seemed to glow with an inner light, not reflecting. Based on Bither's story, his own observations, and the photographs, Taft concluded that paranormal phenomena must have been involved. He called this a true case of haunting. Over 2.5 months, investigators saw lights and poltergeist activity. Doris was instructed to try summoning the entities, so she began swearing and yelling at them. Emotions. The LPRS strongly advises against provoking any spirits. We prefer asking politely for spirits to show themselves or to speak to us. As Doris was yelling and swearing, a green mist began to appear, and it took on the form of a huge male. This caused one of the investigators to faint. We have never had an investigator faint on the job. I wonder just how bad it had to have been. As she continued hurling abuses, this green mist swirled from the corner and started growing to form a very muscular upper torso of a man. The investigators focused their cameras on this semi transparent form and clicked many photographs. Only a vague, smoky shadow came out in the images. The human form moved over to where Doris was sitting. It hung there right in front of her for a few seconds and then it vanished. Nothing came out on the photographs other than a kind of a swirling mist. Seeing is believing, but the public wanted some images. The whole idea of their research was to get proof of the afterlife or proof of the spirit world. The entity took on human form while Doris was yelling and swearing. The researchers decided that the emotions that she was putting out were helping the spirit to grow stronger. The kids said that anytime certain songs were played, mostly Black Sabbath, the entities would become more active. They also said that when their mother was home, the entities were the most active. Here is a little story that I actually heard Ozzy Osbourne telling about. He said that when the movie The Exorcist came out, the band went to see it. They were all freaked out and they wound up staying up all night together in one hotel room. My brother saw it and he kept seeing shadows moving around the house for the next week. I saw The Exorcist at the theater shortly after my brother did. I kind of laughed through a lot of it. I thought it was just a really cool movie. I have a copy of the uncut version here somewhere. It has all the deleted scenes that Hollywood thought were just too scary for the public. And there were a lot of them. Like when Linda Blair comes down the stairs upside down. Cool. I guess I was so wrapped up in wondering how they did the special effects, I didn't really focus on the show itself. This is odd for me because I usually really get into watching movies. As the family were being terrorized and the investigators weren't there to document things, the entities began growing stronger. The family's emotions seemed to be feeding these beings. The researchers decided that the best course of action was for Doris and her kids to move to a less haunted and less falling down house. They were able to pack their things and move to a new house. But whatever these entities were, they followed Doris. The house wasn't haunted, she was. Over the years, the attacks continued, but the reports seemed to indicate they weren't as severe. No more biting or being thrown across the room, and Doris didn't think she somehow became pregnant during one of the attacks. She was found to have an ectopic pregnancy, which is a life threatening situation, but it can be resolved. An ectopic pregnancy is when the fertilized egg attaches itself to the wall of the fallopian tube instead of to the uterus. Around the 1980s, Doris just disappeared from the public. She no longer wanted any notoriety. Too many people showing up at all hours wanting to either save her soul or have a look inside her home. That is a weird occurrence that I just don't understand. We hear your house is haunted. Can we come in and have a look? Well, who the heck are you? In 1978, Frank de Felletta released his book called The Entity, which was based on Doris Bither's story. In 1983, the book was turned into a movie starring Barbara Hershey and Ron Silver. Yes, I saw the movie as well. 2009, Brian Harris came forward to say that his mother had died from pulmonary arrest. She'd stopped breathing in 1995. There were no further attacks on any of the family members. You could say that Doris was kind of asking for it, drinking and playing and with talking boards. She opened herself up to being attacked. Her kids were also being targeted. They were unwilling participants in her downward spiral. When people do dangerous things, they should try to think about those that are with them, but they seldom do. The trouble with drug and alcohol abuse is they don't see what's happening. They're being controlled by the chemicals, not by themselves. As for the others in this show, those 13 Hmong men who all died in their sleep, during any war, people are called on to do things that civilians would never be able to think of. To them, it would be totally repulsive. Folks never in uniform have no idea what a person can do in the name of God and country. Their story may never come to light. The CIA has a bad reputation for destroying any documents that might put them in a bad position. The government rule says that all documents must be maintained for future scrutiny. Some people have decided that they are above the law. Many politicians think this way as well. They forget who's paying their salary, who they actually work for. Is mind control a real thing? A lot of folks and a lot of evidence say that it is. Too many times things have happened that make zero sense unless the person involved was being maneuvered by somebody with an evil agenda. Humans can do inhuman things. They can justify just about anything with the mantra, the end justifies the means. The world would be a better place as long as they're calling the shots. At least that's the way they see it. I'm going to break the law to get elected to whatever position I want so that I can do a better job than that other person. Then again, maybe these elites aren't the ones in charge. Maybe there are outside forces at play. Some otherworldly entities have waylaid them with promises of wealth and power. This could be some alien civilization from another galaxy or denizens from some other dimension. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends, tell your neighbors. Tell everybody they should be listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Share the show, like Tony Merkel says. Don't care how you share it, just share it. If you'd like to support the show, buy one of my books. You can find them at Amazon.com or at the Organic Man Coffee Trike. They make good presents, and if you haven't bought your Christmas presents by now, it's too late. But they do make good presents. They're easy to wrap. They don't require batteries. They don't break when you drop them. And if the person receiving a book doesn't like it, he can rewrap it and give it to someone else. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they've strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.